Welcome to Artificiality, the podcast from Helen and Dave Edwards from Sonder Studio. We created Sonder Studio to empower humans in our complex age of machines, data, and AI. Through our strategy, innovation, and change services, we help organizations activate the collective intelligence of humans and AI. We work with leaders in tech, data, and analytics to co-create AI strategies, design innovative AI products and services, and craft change management programs that help their people succeed in an AI-powered, data-centric, complex world. We leverage the new world of foundation models, generative AI, and low-code environments to create an amplified human-machine experience centered on machines that can be a mine for our minds. You can learn more about us at getsonder.com. Welcome back to Artificiality. Thanks for joining us again. Before we get started, I'd like to share again this week that we are looking for some beta testers, I guess, folks to work with us on what will be a new paid tier of Artificiality. So if you're interested in joining us, please reach out, send an email to hello@getsonder.com and get a comp subscription for what's coming up. We are working on a combination of media, mostly written, but also probably some podcast and video parts of this paid tier, and looking at it as a deep dive per month on a particular topic related, especially to generative AI. And we're working on the editorial calendar now. We're looking at AI safety as a key topic, creativity, AI at work, AI in education. Those are the kinds of topics we're running through. So if you're interested in helping us craft this, please reach out. We'd love to hear from you. So this week, we are here to talk about values. So Helen, why are we talking about values related to AI?
Well, the short answer is because the world is intent on developing artificial general intelligence, maybe superintelligence, maybe, there's different ways of describing it. But the more that we want AI to be useful to us, the more it needs to understand our values. But there's a real problem with that because values are complex, and by definition, as we put more values into mathematics and find proxies, the proxy is something simple that represents something complex. And so what happens to our values as more and more of our values are put into machines? And there's lots of different ways to think about that. So we this week is our efforts at thinking about that in sort of a deeper way.
So let's start with the basic part. You said that values are complex. And what I hear there is values are complex in a variety of ways. They are emergent. Each of us have our own values. And those values change and adapt to the people around us, our lived experience, how the world changes. But it all sort of comes up from the bottom. There is no top-down set of values for the world.
That's the perspective that we take, right? It comes from, values come from individuals, and they emerge over the course of our lives as well, and they adapt and change as we learn and change and are exposed to different contexts. But the other thing that happens is that we have group values, and they arise through cultural processes, and some of that we talked about last week. And here's the thing, they take time to cohere around. It takes time for your value to be something that I can cohere around. And they take time to embed in our institutions, and they take time to scale. And at that's a human pace that we understand. And even that's complex. But you put all of that instantly into a machine, and we don't, we're still struggling with how social media changed that scaling effect. And I think it's really fascinating to consider that there's this tension that we have right now where the world is, sort of overwhelmingly complex and changing so fast. And we feel like we actually want to have more stable values in some ways. But it's that the fact they are inherently ambiguous, that's actually incredibly special, and that allows us to kind of live together. It's that ambiguity, that slightly, I don't quite know what your value is, the way you see this value. It's the ambiguity between it that allows us to interact and create meaning between us, and allows us not to be in perpetual conflict for a start. The ambiguity is actually really important. So that the more we mathematize people values and make them more precise, potentially the more conflict we have, because we can see specifically values that clash with our own. And machines aren't good at leaving that ambiguity for us. We need to find ways to value that ambiguity.
I find these conversations about values, I get stuck in just sort of a moment of going, what the hell are they all thinking? You know, like, how can you be having a conversation with, how can you hear any one of the, the prominent, AI leaders who we could reference and quote, talking about how they're going to imbue human values in an algorithm? And how can they say that do they not read the news? Do they not pay attention to politics? Do they not see how the Supreme Court has changed things that are fundamental values that over periods of time we've now seen huge swings back and forth, and massive polarization of what we as Americans value, set aside the fact that our values in the U.S. are different from the values of our close friends and neighbors in Canada. Like, and that it gets even bigger and broader as you move around the world. And you hear AI leaders. We were listening to the podcast with Mark Andreessen being interviewed with Sam Harris recently, and Mark sort of laughing it off, saying, well, I don't want the Chinese to win and have their values in the AI. But how can you...
Well, the Chinese Communist Party.
The Chinese Communist Party.
Precise
to be precise, but that's who would determine. That's in his view. That's who would determine. But you sit there and say, well, but there is no one set of human values. I mean, I significantly disagree with Mark on all kinds of things that are valued. So how do we? Help me out here. How do they feel? What's the pathway that they think that exists to be able to put values for all of humanity into an algorithm?
Well, I think they want the algorithm.
They want the algorithm to determine values and therefore be directive.
Or to I think, implicitly discover. Mm-hmm. So using reinforcement learning to implicitly discover values and then make values your values as predictable as what you buy on Amazon next, rather than what humans do, which is to have this explicit definition process, like explicitly defining values. Like you, I have the same cognitive dissonance as you on this. It's actually quite confusing that the smartest people in the world, theoretically, by proxy, according to the algorithm, but no, that these incredibly highly educated people seem to think that there's a way to have some sort of universal value. I mean, I don't believe they do think that. I think that if you sat down and talked to them, they'd say, oh, no, well, of course there's lots of different values. But I'm very confused by the discourse around it, because on one hand you hear some AI researchers say, well, all we need to do is load in all the laws. And I'm like scratching my head going, hang on a minute, laws are a subset of our codified values that sort of sit 20 years behind what we actually care about. And if it does arise from the level of individuals, I think that's part of the insight. What we've got to think about is that what's really going on behind the scenes is the idea that we can mathematize our individual personal states. Well, and there's a long game there.
And if what they're aiming for is to imbue values in an algorithm, and I understand the premise that they're saying we're going to use an algorithm to help discover and surface your values. Okay, that's a laudable goal. but then they're anticipating creating an AGI, a superintelligence, a whatever it is, something that is vastly more intelligent than us and is going to make all kinds of decisions. They're sort of vague on what that means, because there isn't really a standard definition of AGI or superintelligence. But if you're going down the path that this thing will therefore be able to make lots of decisions for us, right, and in some ways will be in charge, even if it could understand each one of our individual values, how does it optimize for an individual's value, a couple's value, a family's value, a community's value, a country's values, a worldwide values? Because there's lots of different levels of where those values can reside. And we know in our own human experience that there's constant conflict with our own values. I value this and I value that, and I can't have both at the same time right now. So how am I going to make that choice?
Well, I think you just described the joy that comes from having I think it's called T Nguyen calls this the pleasures of value clarity. And isn't it so much easier if an algorithm actually told you, though, this is what you value, and everyone values this? And he's actually done some terrific writing, which I think has informed a lot of our thinking here, where he talks about value capture and our values being captured essentially by algorithms. And I'm taking this to so what happens when values are captured by an AGI? And, determining your values, it's hard work. It's a lifelong journey. And a self, myself, yourself, but a self, and these are T's words, a self with complex and subtle interests is hard to understand. And a lot of times we might not want that inner wrestle. We might not want that difficulty of wrestling with our values. So the more technology is able to take our values and make them portable and make them scalable, on one hand, we sort of feel that that's a good answer and easy for us. But on the other is well, there really is something that's kind of catastrophically lost then. I'm not sure where that goes ultimately. I think it's a nice quote from T again. It says that it's metrics and math that make our lives easier to live, make it possible to, in his words, autonomously damage one's own autonomy. And so allowing your values to be captured because it sort of feels easier. I'll let my Fitbit I'll let my Apple Watch tell me how many steps to do today, because I've outsourced that metric to the watch. That's how I'm going to feel fitter today, or whatever it is. But then not allow myself to do things that would otherwise have been fun because I've got to meet that metric. Mm-hmm. Not go to the movies with a friend because I've got to get my steps in. It's and people do that. There's good literature about that.
Well, there's also the tension that outsourcing values, having somebody determine those values, can. I'm going to bring Kierkegaard into this, as you know, and as listeners know. I think a lot through the lens of the existentialists. Or at least I appreciate their point of view. Maybe that's a better way of saying it.
I think you get ChatGPT to write Kierkegaard fan fiction, right?
That would be fantastic. I wonder how ChatGPT would write Kierkegaard, or even better, could it write like Immanuel Kant? I mean, that would be amazing.
But no one would read it.
No one would read it because no one would ever be able to understand it. Anyway, Kierkegaard. The whole premise. The interesting part is when an outside force, in his era, it was more around government influence and religious influence and society. Reducing the number of choices can reduce your angst, right? You don't have that moment of standing at the edge of the cliff with so many choices. And you could see how outsourcing values, mathematizing values, having an AGI come and tell you, no, this is what's really valuable to you. Don't do this other thing because that actually aligns with your values. Could feel quite good and freeing.
And that is in some ways that's the promise of personal AI.
But what it also does is it removes that meaningful moment of making an authentic choice. And we are constantly, we're constantly battling. There's no one. It's not, and that's not an either or choice in a human life. We're always making these distinctions of like, do I want to actually go through that human struggle of trying to figure out what I really want to do right now, and grappling with those conflicting values. And I love to use that, having that autonomy over my choice. Or am I in a place now where I'm going to align myself with the person or the people or the group or society that says this is the way to go do something? Because belonging in that is important to me, and so I'm going to just outsource that choice to the group that I want to belong with. There's a lot of other ways of thinking, but that's one that's sort of top of mind. It makes more sense to me that we'll make those choices when there's other people that we actually want to belong with, right? We as a couple, we're constantly making compromises and making choices. There's always things that no matter how much time we spend together and how many years together, we're always going to have some different sets of values. But we'll make choices to compromise with each other or for our kids or with our community or for our work or whatever it is. But that's because there's a core sense of belonging that we value. And that is an innate human value, to belong to something. I don't know whether I'll ever feel comfortable wanting to belong with my AI. That's a bit beyond my reach. So I find it interesting because you're asking an AI to understand your values, and then you're proposing that an AI could be, not you, sorry, the grand AI, gurus are going to create this grand AI that's going to tell us all how to live our lives. But there's a fundamental compromise as humans when we do that, because we're looking to belong with someone. And I don't see that connection happening. So how are we really going to say yes to the values that the machine says we have?
Well, I think the insight for me in this was, because it had a pretty good appreciation for the temporal aspect, the time and the context, and how your values shift over time, and you value that flexibility. But I hadn't flipped it around and thought about how what's really valuable is the ambiguity. It's the bit that can't be captured in a definitive statement, like I value this today, and then can't be captured in math. There's going back to this idea that T put in our heads about there's a deep metaphorical reason that values are hard to mathematize, because they actually do resist being mathematized. The minute that you can put a value into math, it's not a value anymore, it's just an algorithm. And that's a really interesting way to think about values, because it becomes a very interesting way to think about humans versus machines, that there's just this constant gap that we will advance as a frontier, as a tide line, or what have you, over time. The closer the machine gets to us, the more we just run away that little bit, kind of like just how the chipmunk always manages to be one step ahead of the dog. There's this frontier that's moving, and as more and more values are codified and put into math, they become algorithms, not values. They become prediction tools, however we want to call them. And what's left is this zone that we're constantly discovering. And I think that's a fascinating part of Mind for Our Minds, and a part of collective intelligence, because you see it happen with groups of humans as the individuals wrestle with their own tensions, their internal tensions. Those internal tensions turn to group and interpersonal tensions, which are resolved with ritual and coherent strategies. And that changes and forms different identities and groups and culture. And we talked about that a little bit last week. And we still don't really know where machines fit into that. So there's this gap that's just distinctly human. And it's got to do with uncertainty, and it's got to do with ambiguity. And they're things that make us sometimes really uncomfortable, but they're also the things that give rise to our constant pursuit. And it's our constant pursuit that keeps us just a bit ahead.
the constant pursuit also happens at different speeds and different times for each of us as individuals, but also over our lifetime. You think about times when there's great change and you're reconsidering lots of values because of something internal or something external in the world. But we all have different journeys. Some people can be quite fixed in their values for periods of time, and other people can move around a lot. I guess part of my dream for a mind is that it can recognize and reflect that. Not try to capture those values, but try and aid in perhaps some of the reflection, and discovery, that self-reflection of what do you really value. Is there a way for an AI to help us dig deeper and to understand ourselves more, but not to do it in a way that says, aha, well then I'm going to do this with this knowledge. I'm going to then direct you to do X, Y, Z. More sort of that sort of internal questioning.
Oh, I mean, undoubtedly. I think people use technology for that now. Great apps that nudge you in those sorts of ways. But what's interesting is how the moments that you experience of that sort of that prompting or that self-reflection, when you reflect on that moment of self-reflection, you realize that it's a very in the moment choice as to whether to take notice of it. So this has got to be a paradox for personal AI design. Is how can you allow respect? How does an AI essentially do two things? Respect your autonomy, but also guide you at the same time.
And you're right. Understanding us and understanding our values has to allow for our values to change based on our lived experience, and that's a challenge. And I worry that the AI gurus, the powers that be, aren't thinking with that level of nuance.
I doubt they have time to sit around talking about it.
I doubt you. Well, perhaps they'll listen to our podcast. And so if any of you are, buddy buddies with any of the people who you think might value...
Buddy buddies, where did that come from?
I'm thinking the 70s and 80s, I guess. If any of you would know any people who would benefit from listening to Artificiality and reading what we're writing on our newsletter, please point them to us. You can find all of our content on Substack at artificiality.substack.com. Sign up there to get all the content for free, and also sign up there to get an alert when we move towards our paid model. And again, if you're interested in helping us craft this, please reach out, send us an email at hello@getsonder.com and join the crew and get some free content in return for helping us out. Thanks a lot, and we'll talk to you soon. Thanks for listening. If you enjoy our podcast, please subscribe on Substack or your favorite podcast platform. And please leave a positive rating or comment. Sharing your positive feedback helps us reach more people and connect them with the world's great minds. Seriously, a review on Apple Podcasts is a big deal. And if you like how we think, then contact us about our speaking and workshops and human-centered product design. You can learn more about us at getsonder.com, and you can contact us at hello@getsonder.com. You can learn more about making better decisions in our book, Make Better Decisions: How to Improve Your Decision-Making in the Digital Age. The book is an essential guide to practicing the cognitive skills needed for making better decisions in the age of data, algorithms, and AI. Please check it out at mbd.zone, on Amazon, bookshop.org, or place an order through your favorite local bookstore. Stay